But the most important infrastructure is the brain infrastructure. It's the gray matter infrastructure. I can repair a road, I can repair a port, I can repair a rail, but once damaged, the gray matter infrastructure, you cannot repair it.
By making agriculture a big wealth-creating sector, we will unleash new economic opportunities that will lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty.
Have a clear vision. Have confidence in yourself. Have faith in God that there's nothing impossible that you cannot achieve. Surround yourself with great mentors that will always give you positive feedback.
Dr. Akin Adesina, one of Africa's biggest giants, who is currently the president of the African Development Bank, is a man who is very known so much as a great reformer after having reformed the agriculture in one of the biggest economies in Africa, the Federal Republic of Nigeria, where he introduced measures to make sure that the supply chain of fertilizer was cleaned up and that the fertilizer would go directly to the farmers, undercutting all the middlemen and exterminating lots of corruption that was taking place in the Nigerian system. He's a man who grew up as a poor boy in a farming community, went on to study agricultural economics in Nigeria, and went on to obtain a PhD in agricultural economics at Purdue University in the United States. Today's messages will be very important to those who are into agriculture and to those who believe that agriculture is the future of Africa, and to those who believe that we should invest a lot in agriculture and treat it as a business, not just as a way for poor people to go by on the African continent. So we'll start with rule number 1 of Dr. Adesina's top 10 rules, which says the future of Africa is in agriculture.
You know, I've always been saying it, that Africa's biggest asset is in agriculture. 65% of all the arable land to feed the 9 billion people in the world is not in Asia, it's not in Latin America, it's not in Europe, it's in Africa. What Africa does with agriculture will determine the future of food in the world. So you're beginning to see that in this Africa Investment Forum. A lot of investments that are going to food and agribusiness, into logistics, into processing and value addition, into creating the infrastructure density in rural areas that will allow us to have food and ag businesses locate there and therefore be able to set up value chains that will process our cocoa, that will process our rice, that will do every single thing that we have. And so that's really the exciting part. And that's why the African Development Bank, we are investing $25 billion over the next 10 years because we can see that future, because the size of the food and ag industry in Africa will be what a whopping $1 trillion market by 2030. So Africa should not just be the market for others, it shouldn't be the market for others. It should take on that market and feed its rapidly growing populations.
Rule number 2, invest in women.
I want the bank to do a lot more on girls' education, making sure that we can get our girls into school, stay in school, achieve in school, and also make sure that the school environment it's one where they can be free without having to be having, a sexual harassment or any kind of molestation, so they can learn in peace and quiet. And that is very, very important. But also, we shouldn't be having early marriages because early marriages deprive economies. Thirdly, I really think when it comes to getting Africa going, believe me, it's the women that make it, bouge, as they say in French. Why do I say that? Most of the businesses you see in Africa today that are small and medium-sized enterprises are owned by women. We were doing 2 things. First is to create what is called an affirmative finance action for women. This is to leverage $3 billion of financing for women alone in Africa. I wish I could do so for men, but I think that women's situation is so compelling. 97% of the women that you give loans to, they pay it back, And so I think it's very important to continue to support them. So the African Development Bank is currently putting this together to leverage $3 billion of support just for women, women businesses and women entrepreneurs in Africa.
Rule number 3, combine theory with practical training.
You go to other places like the Art University in Colombia. The students come in, they have farms, they manage their farms. At the end of education, they have to own those farms. And today, 100% of their students all get jobs immediately after they finish. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to have practical programs. We can't be having people outside the university system doing such kind of great programs. Our universities are not connecting to it. Let me also say that it's very important that we have one-year practical experiences for our students outside of the university environment. The best part of my own training was actually 1 year I spent on a farm. Even as a minister today, I still go back to that. It's very important to do that. But we must also get CEOs of agribusinesses and agro-allied industry to come to our universities to provide practical experiences to bolster academic training. I remember, Joyce, way back in those days, you came up with a term, you call it translational capacity. I remember I wrote it in my notes, so when the book is out, I will remember to put it there. But what you said then was the ability to put knowledge to use, to create jobs, and to have job attainment. The development of students with practical experience and competencies to manage agricultural enterprises should therefore remain the focus of agricultural training programs in our universities.
Rule number 4, have a clear vision and confidence in yourself.
Have a clear vision. Have confidence in yourself. Have faith in God that there's nothing impossible that you cannot achieve. Surround yourself with great mentors that will always give you positive feedback and also some hard feedback about some things you need to change. But look, there's a reason where there's only one you in the world. And there's a reason why God put you there. So live your life always to the fullest potential that you can. But don't ever listen to so many naysayers. The world is full of naysayers. But you've got to believe in yourself and go with what your heart tells you can do. I firmly believe that with God on your side, there's absolutely nothing that you cannot do, as long as you focus on people, not on yourself.
Rule number 5, hire a competent and diverse team.
If you go into an aircraft and you see a pilot, you don't go in and ask them whether they're from small country or from large country. You just want a very competent person flying that aircraft for you. And I have lived and worked more than 15 years, in African countries, different African countries. Almost all of them, until 4 years ago when I came to Nigeria, I've always worked in small countries and in fragile states. So I understand those issues very, very well. In fact, you might even say my biggest bias is, as you can tell, is always towards small countries and fragile states, because that's where my professional work had been done. When I was in Liberia, in Guinea, in the Mano River area, on boats, actually doing research. I understand those challenges very well, and I want to make sure that those priorities get focused by the bank. And the other thing that I would say, is I'm somebody that's very big in competence, in getting competent people. In Nigeria today, my chief of staff, who is a woman, is not from Nigeria. She's from Kenya. And how many ministers do you find in a country that have a chief of staff from a different country? I am big on inclusiveness. I am big on making sure that you have gender empowerment.
Rule number 6, know your customers.
When it comes to the issue of dealing with fertilizers and seeds, when I got to Nigeria, I found that the fertilizer sector was perhaps one of the most corrupt things you ever found. Government was buying and distributing fertilizers and seeds, and it was like a pipeline. So it was clear that a government-driven system displaces the private sector, did not stimulate entrepreneurship, did not build value chains and supply chains that will reach the farmers in rural areas. If you're in the private sector, or you're a bank or something, you must know your customers. Well, I found out that in Nigeria, and it's the same across all African countries, we don't have a database of our farmers. We don't know our customers. So we just say, well, we're spending money on farmers. Well, so we started in Nigeria, Africa's first national registration of our farmers. Last year, we started with 4.2 million farmers that were registered. This year, I hired 10,000 people to go all across the country and register our farmers. We registered 10 million farmers this year alone. Last year when we started, we reached 1.5 million genuine farmers, which impacted on about 7 million people with improved food security in their households. This year already, we've reached close to 5 million additional farmers this year. Right. So in 2-year period, we reached 6 million people, farmers.
Rule number 7, technology and entrepreneurship are the future.
Well, the world is changing so fast. We're talking about a world that's a digital economy world. It's a knowledge-intensive world. And so it's no longer your comparative advantage as a country or as countries. It's no longer going to be determined by the amount of natural resources that you have. It's going to be determined by the creativity of your people, the knowledge, the ability to be entrepreneurial and create world-class businesses. And you know that in the world that is a digital economy, the ability to code, ability to program is going to drive a lot of things. From the African Development Bank side, we are helping to establish 130 coding centers, working with Google and Microsoft, so our young people can actually get into that very, very quickly. We supported the Kigali Institute for Science and Technology, which is chunking out today top-notch masters people in ICT, and also with Africa 50 now coming on board to support the Kigali Innovation City. That's going to help to be able to create viable businesses.
Rule number 8, invest in the brain infrastructure.
I want to urge all of us, particularly governments, to see nutrition as an investment. For instance, nutrition social impact bonds will allow countries to post bonds to front-load investments that will improve nutrition outcomes. We are talking about investment in infrastructure, which is the basis of human growth and development. I know that we have all kinds of infrastructure, and we support all kinds of infrastructure, road, rail, ports. We can fix all those, no problem with them. But the most important infrastructure is the brain infrastructure. It's the gray matter infrastructure. I can repair a road, I can repair a port, I can repair a rail, but once damaged, the gray matter infrastructure, you cannot repair it. And therefore, I want to urge all governments to see investment in this area as investing in gray matter infrastructure.
Rule number 9, Africa must view agriculture as a wealth creation vehicle and not as a primary activity.
To do this, we must fundamentally change the way we look at agriculture. Agriculture, for way too long, has been treated as a development activity, a social sector. It has been treated as a sector for managing poverty. Hence, intentions and policies tend not to be structural, but rather palliative for poverty alleviation. I do not believe in poverty reduction. I believe in wealth creation. The lenses with which we look at issues determines how we address them, either to see challenges or opportunities. Because over 70% of the world's population in African countries live in rural areas and depend on agriculture for a living, their pathway out of poverty is tied to what happens to agriculture. By making agriculture a big wealth-creating sector, we will unleash new economic opportunities that will lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty.
Rule number 10, shorten the talk and get to the transactions.
I think Africa needs to take advantage not only of the resources that it has domestically, but it needs to actually market itself better and leverage global capital for its own development. And so when you take a look at the amount of infrastructure gap that Africa has today in terms of financing is anything between $78 billion to about $112 billion. Obviously, the governments can play a role, the bank can play a role, and private sector in Africa can play a role, but there's a pool of capital out there that is looking for where to invest. And so what we decided to do was to set up this that is called the Africa Investment Forum. And the focus of this forum is not just to be another forum where you go and talk. No, we're tired of talking. We just basically want to have nothing but transaction, transaction, transaction. So this particular Africa Investment Forum is 100% transactional. No speeches, no political speeches. We just want to connect global pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, institutional investors to Africa and leverage those investments to Africa. And what's going to be unique about it is that, people will say the capital is there, but always is issue of where are the bankable projects. And so a key part of this is developing the bankable projects for Africa. And second is, people always talk about risk. I don't think risk is a big issue. The issue is how you manage your risk and how the upside returns. And so what we're trying to do with this is we are setting up a very powerful co-guarantee platform that will de-risk the investments that land on Africa on this particular platform.
Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think of Dr. Akin's top 10 rules for success. He's a great man. He's a man who I follow very dearly. He's one of the men who I look up to. It's an amazing life story and it's done amazing things. If you want us to cover another lion of Africa who you think is great, or another lioness of Africa who you think we need to compile their tidbits of wisdom, please do let me know also in the comments below, and I'll be sure to cover that person before you even know it. Until next time, see you. My name is Maro.